global conflicts, fighting climate change, digital challenges, and joint responses to pandemics. Pressing global challenges have to be tackled together. No country, no matter how big, can solve these problems alone. The Alliance for Multilateralism is a dynamic network whose goal it is to defend multilateral organizations, to rise to new challenges, and to advance reform where necessary. International law and human rights. Human rights must be respected and promoted. Humanitarian organizations must be allowed to do their work. The Alliance works to defend humanitarian principles and to strengthen human rights. Global public goods. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a wake-up call for multilateralism. To master this challenge and others, we need strong and agile international organizations whose members fulfill their commitments and pay their dues. Cyberspace. Cyberspace connects people across borders. The Paris Call for Trust and Security and other initiatives are aimed at strengthening rules for behavior online together with civil society organizations. Climate and security. The Alliance promotes joint action on climate change and demands a more systematic approach to its security implications. Rules for weapons systems. The weapons systems of the future need new international rules, and the rules need to be kept for the old ones. Nuclear arms control must be safeguarded. The use of future weapons systems must be firmly grounded in international law and state control, joint rules and stronger dialogue. Our world needs cooperation, solidarity and team players, such as those who come together in the Alliance for Multilateralism.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear excellencies, welcome to the Ministerial meeting of the Alliance for Multilateralism. Thank you very much for joining us from all over the world here. Sadly, we cannot meet in person, but the more we appreciate that you are participating on a digital level today. My name is Astrid Frohloff. I'm a TV moderator and journalist from Germany, and I have the pleasure to guide you through the conference today. First of all, I would like to introduce to you the Federal Foreign Minister, Heiko Maas, who is joining me here in person in the Berlin studio. Very warm welcome, Your Excellency.
Hi, good to see you.
And next to Minister Maas, we are also welcoming the French Foreign Minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, who is joining us virtually. Here he is. Bienvenue, monsieur. Et merci.
Welcome, sir.
Merci d'être avec nous.
Thank you for being with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, we convene today in the margins of the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. We want to show our commitment to protecting, preserving and advancing human rights law and institutions. Around 50 foreign ministers and representatives from the civil society and international organizations are participating today, and I think this is a very strong signal, and it shows your commitment to multilateralism. So let's start now. First of all, I would like to hand over to the Federal Foreign Minister, Heiko Maas. The virtual floor is yours for the introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, and I think today I can say dear friends, 1 year ago we held our last in-person meeting in Geneva. Soon afterwards, the world went into lockdown. But today, even though we are only meeting virtually, there is new hope. Thanks to global cooperation, effective vaccines were developed quicker than ever before in history. As early as April 2020, our alliance had called for treating vaccines as a global public good. And now we have to deliver on this commitment. This means strengthening the multilateral health infrastructure that we have built during the pandemic, particularly the ACT Accelerator and COVAX, its vaccine pillar. They remain the best tools to avoid a global run on vaccines in which all of us would lose. Dear colleagues, dear friends, last week Germany therefore pledged an additional amount of 1.5 billion euros for the ACT accelerator. This brings our contribution to 2.1 billion euro, making us the single biggest donor. And we also welcome the recent new contributions announced by the United States, the European Union, Japan, Canada, and others. Now, we must work together to ensure that COVAX also gets the necessary vaccines. And I'm particularly happy to see the first delivery of COVAX vaccines arrive in Ghana today. And other locations will follow this week. At the same time, we should look beyond the current virus. We invite you all to contribute to the resolution on strengthening the World Health Organization's global emergency preparedness and response, which the European Union has tabled in the run-up to the World Health Assembly in May. Dear colleagues, one of the pandemic's side effects was the boost it gave to the digital revolution. New technologies create opportunities, but also entail risks. How do we protect human rights online as much as offline? And how do we make sure that artificial intelligence reduces discrimination instead of reinforcing it? These are questions we should work on together. And I hope you will support a new resolution of the Human Rights Council that would extend the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy into the digital sphere. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the fight against the pandemic must not distract our attention from other existential threats. Climate change, for example. Last year, many countries and the European Union set themselves more ambitious climate goals. Now, words need to be followed by action. One issue our alliance is looking at is the negative consequences of climate change on human rights. We are therefore encouraging those of you who have not yet done so to join the Geneva Pledge, to foster cooperation between the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Human Rights Council. Dear friends, the pandemic, the digital revolution, and climate change remain the top challenges of our times. It is on us to show that multilateralism is the answer, that multilateralism delivers. And this is the purpose of our group and this meeting today. Thank you all for being a part of it. And now it is my great pleasure to hand over directly to you, dear Jean-Yves.
Thank you, dear Heike. Ministers, dear friends, multilateralism, which we have built little by little since 1945, the form of multilateralism we're defending today, is not just a method of action. It's also a set of values. It's a certain idea of human beings and their dignity. That's why we wanted, this year, once again, to have our new meeting of our alliance happen at the same time as the opening of the Human Rights Council, as we did last year. In 1 year, while the pandemic has been at the forefront of the world scene, there has been considerable backsliding in many areas, and the role of this council remains absolutely essential, and we need to support it. France is very proud to be seated there once again alongside some of your countries. It's a great responsibility of which we're fully aware and which we intend fully to take on board. acting wherever it's necessary in the world, very concretely, to have human rights be fully respected. Today, we'll begin by mentioning some of the new threats which bear down on human rights. I'm thinking, first of all, about challenges of the digital revolution. Fighting for the universal nature of human rights today means, in fact, fighting for the right to privacy, to freedom of expression, the freedom to inform or be informed, not stopping at the place where cyberspace starts, and fighting all violations of this, even those that are perpetrated using digital tools, is absolutely essential. Virtual matters are a full part of our reality today, and if we needed to prove that further, today's meeting does so. An increasing share of our existence is now happening in cyberspace, and there cannot therefore be any no-go areas or lawless zones, especially when we're talking about fundamental rights. That's why a form of multilateralism, which is effective and useful for the values that are bringing us together today, is a form of multilateralism which works to develop and enforce new regulations in this area. New regulations for responsible use of artificial intelligence along the lines of the recommendations made by UNESCO, and ways forward opened up by our Worldwide Partnership for International Artificial Intelligence, which began in June 2020, and then new regulations so that medias can go on fully playing their role as a pillar of democracy in spite of economic and technological developments which have overturned the way in which they work today. And that's one of the main goals of the Partnership for Information and Democracy, which we have created with our partners of the Alliance for Multilateralism. Christophe Deloire, Secretary General of Reporters Without Boundaries, will come back to this soon. And you've said, Heiko, that climate disruptions as well constitute a new form of threat for human rights. Unfortunately, this is environmental reality, but this environmental reality is all the more fearsome because it is sometimes going to combine, and even is already combined, with new forms of societal reality. The fight for the climate, there has to be a fight for human beings, not just for future generations, but starting here and now, a fight for the most vulnerable members of our societies today. And that's the meeting of the Coalition for Feminist Action for Climate Justice, which has been set up in the perspective of the Generation Equality Forum, which will be held this year, and we'll be talking about that later. In the second part of this meeting, we'll also go over our collective answer to the health crisis. We'll mention the short term, in particular the issue of universal access to international public goods, which vaccines ought to be, and the fight we are leading in the context of the Act A initiative. Heiko has already mentioned that. And then we will also need to think and act together on the reform of our multilateral health architecture, which will involve several very concrete projects: strengthening of the WHO's role by improving, in particular, its warning system, our ability to have scientific expertise, which is necessary to act, especially thanks to the high-level expert council One Health, which our last meeting in November allowed us to create, and then a possibility to send verification missions in the field. These are three initiatives, three very concrete projects, which we will have to mobilize on. These are subjects where we're going to need to act together so as to find more effective forms of collective action. I won't go on at any further length, and I will give you the floor, Astrid, so that you may, in your turn, give it to the other speakers.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Your Excellency. Thank you for your introductory remarks. That was very kind. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we will start our first panel today, we will have to do something which I think is a must for every international conference. We have to take a family photo. We do it very quickly. I know it's quite a challenge to do it virtually. Your Excellency, may I ask you to come over? We've got a photographer here in front of the stage. And may I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to put on your camera now, if possible, because we are trying to gather virtually now for a big picture. Oh, that looks really good. You can see yourself in the background. The minister is here. Oh, yes, I think it looks nice. So let's take a picture. Okay. It gives a little bit of feeling of a family gathering, maybe. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So we got a good picture. Thanks a lot. Let's continue with our program now. On our agenda, we have got three major topics today: human rights online, climate change and human rights, pandemic preparedness and response. We're having a very long list of speakers, and we are very grateful for your commitment. But at the same time, I think we must have a good time discipline. So we would appreciate if you would stay in your time frame in order to give everybody the chance to speak. Thank you very much. So in our first panel, we would like to take a closer look at how to preserve human rights in the light of new challenges, especially in regard to the online world. And I am happy to introduce to you our distinguished speakers in the first panel: Foreign Ministers of Finland and of Canada. We've got the Director General of UNESCO, and also the Forum on Information and Democracy is represented today. Thank you very much for being with us. So our first speaker today comes from Finland, the Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto. He will contribute on the important Freedom Online Coalition's work. So, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, thank you for this opportunity to speak about the Freedom Online Coalition's work and Finland's priorities as the chair of the coalition. In order to build a bright digital future for all, it's crucial to ensure that universal human rights are protected offline as well as online. Attempts in many countries, most recently in Myanmar, to limit citizens' right to peacefully express their views online or offline are very concerning. It's important we raise our voices against state-sponsored internet shutdowns. Half of the world's population is still offline. Finland strongly supports an open, reliable and well-functioning internet accessible and affordable to as many people as possible. UN Women's Generation Equality campaign promotes the rights of women and girls. Finland co-leads the campaign's Action Coalition on Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality together with Armenia, Chile, Rwanda and Tunisia. Our vision is to bring more women into technology as agents of change. We promote safe digital spaces for all to enable women and girls to use their voices online without threat of online gender-based violence. I want to extend our gratitude to the governments of Germany and Ghana for their leadership in the Freedom Online Coalition's activities in promoting digital equality. As chair, Finland will work to deepen the collaboration with the Freedom Online Coalition members, civil society and regional organizations from the Global South, particularly in Africa. Disinformation and online violence can be used to erode trust in democratic institutions. We need transparent, timely and fact-based communication in reinforcing resilience of societies and in saving lives in health pandemics and natural disasters. As chair, we will continue to promote the Freedom Online Coalition's recent and extremely timely joint statement on spread of disinformation online. Finland co-led the drafting process together with the United Kingdom. Finland's own high resilience against disinformation stems from the constitutional right of access to public documents. We also emphasize every citizen's opportunity to develop competencies in digital and media literacy. Dear colleagues, dear friends, we are honored to chair the Freedom Online Coalition during its 10th anniversary. We firmly believe in multi-stakeholder collaboration in everything we do in promoting digitalization. Stepping up our efforts to protect open, secure and free internet in the 2020s can only be achieved through joint action by governments, the private sector, human rights defenders, civil society and academia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your introductory remarks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are very glad that we have high representatives from international organizations with us today. And I'm very happy to welcome now the Director General UNESCO, Mrs. Audrey Azoulay. She will address the UNESCO recommendation on protecting human rights and artificial intelligence. The floor is yours.
Mesdames et messieurs les ministres, Excellences, chers amis.
Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. The pandemic, climate disruption, biodiversity collapse, all of these crises are global by their nature and call for shared solutions. This is the purpose that drives the Alliance for Multilateralism, which is founded on the principles of multilateral international convention and human rights. And this is why I'm so happy to participate in the meeting that you have organized today. We have already mentioned together in the past two of UNESCO's main commitments. One is education and the promotion of reliable, high-quality information. And there's a third field which builds on those reflections, which is something we're going to be thinking about today, the relationship between the development of artificial intelligence and human rights. In this period of pandemic, this question has become even more pressing. We've seen how much we need all the support we can get from new technology to preserve human life. And the penetration and impact of these technologies have to be thought out beforehand so that they can be put to the service of the greater good and aligned on universal values. Because this is first and foremost a subject of human rights. It's also a question of the cohesion of our societies at a time when algorithms risk breaking them down into narrow bubbles of opinion of information, which will threaten the very idea of common goods and living together. At a time when processes, for instance, of recruitment have algorithms which are structurally defavorable to candidates according to the color of their skin, their age, or their sex, and we can have image recognition databases which are mostly made up of white people and therefore perpetuate discrimination. A few lines of code can undermine all of our values. This is not a surprising ambivalence. It's the corollary of the extraordinary power of these technologies. The pandemic has therefore drawn attention to these unanswered questions, which UNESCO has been raising for some time now when dealing, for instance, with the human genome issue. On the issue of gender equality in digital technologies. Our publication, I'd Blush If I Could, back in 2019, showed that algorithms tend to reproduce and amplify pre-existing gender bias in our society. And this is a sign, and we have to be extremely lucid when we deal with this. And the use of these technologies so as not to let our ethical standards slip. This is why we need to act at universal level about multilateralism. This is the only format which will allow us, under the auspices of the United Nations, to be both legitimate and to have global impact, and to be grounded in the universal values which the world proclaimed after the Second World War. Building on this work in scientific ethics, UNESCO has led, for more than a year now, discussions which were not technical but rather ethical to see that technology, that is to say artificial intelligence, be put in service of the greater good. And the recommendation of the ethics in artificial intelligence we're working on incorporates feedback from extensive regional consultations, as well as inputs from civil society and major digital players. And it will be proposed for adoption by our 193 member states at the end of this year, so as to become the first global standard sounding system at international level on the ethics of international intelligence. And between now and at the end of the year, it will be up to member states to commit during the last phase of these negotiations to upholding the highest possible ethical standards based on human rights that we have proposed. Thank you for your commitment and for your attention today.
Well, thank you for your intervention. Thanks a lot. Well, we are glad that we will put the spotlight now on the global partnership on artificial intelligence. And we are glad that the Foreign Minister of Canada will address this issue. We are welcoming His Excellency Marc Garneau.
Distinguished colleagues, I'm sorry that I can't join you live today for this important discussion, but I am pleased to be able to share a few thoughts. I'd like to begin with special thanks to Foreign Ministers Maas and Le Drian for organizing this incredibly timely discussion. Our collective work on human rights, democracy, and multilateralism is even more critical at a moment when we are witnessing global democratic backsliding accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic and various digital trends. For example, recent events in Myanmar and Belarus underscore how authoritarian regimes use digital technologies to violate human rights online and offline. Whether through internet shutdowns or unlawful mass surveillance, this use of digital technologies like artificial intelligence threatens human rights, the rule of law, and democracy. Sadly, human rights defenders, women, and groups that already face intersecting forms of discrimination disproportionately shoulder the impacts of these repressive actions. These authoritarian regimes are undermining the international norms, laws, and institutions that guide the rights-based development and use of digital technologies globally. Such behaviors threaten the very principles of our rules-based international system. Worse, they undermine citizens' capacity to contribute to their society. We must work together and alongside stakeholders in civil society and industry to offer viable alternatives to the rise of digital authoritarianism worldwide. We commend recent examples of multilateral and multi-stakeholder action in UNESCO's excellent work on artificial intelligence ethics and in the Freedom Online Coalition's engagement on digital issues like disinformation, internet shutdowns, artificial intelligence, and digital inclusion. Canada believes that inclusive and resilient societies in the digital age must be rooted in the principle that human rights apply equally offline and online. In our view, a focus on digital inclusion, including the full and meaningful access to and use of digital technology, serves as a strong democratic starting point for an increasingly digitized world. C'est pourquoi le Canada a travaillé étroitement avec.
That's why Canada is working closely with its partners on the international level so as to launch the worldwide partnership for artificial intelligence, as it did last summer. And this began as a bilateral initiative announced by Prime Minister Trudeau and President Macron, and the margin of the G7 summit in 2018 has grown to include 19 members, with even more expected later on this year. Members of the International Partnership for Artificial Intelligence are united by a shared commitment for responsible development and use of artificial intelligence based on human rights, inclusion, diversity, innovation, and economic growth. This partnership brings together experts from the whole world, from the sectors of science, industry, civil society, and government, so as to reduce the gap between principles and practice in artificial intelligence through projects and tools of an innovative nature. Experts in our partnership use artificial intelligence to meet challenges of large scale throughout the world, including management of the pandemic, discovering new drugs, climate change, and improvement of the working conditions of people throughout the world.
The partnership works with multilateral organizations like the OECD, UNESCO, and other institutions to advance a shared vision for artificial intelligence grounded in human rights and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence Chair for 2020-2021, Canada hopes to diversify GPAI's membership by engaging countries from all continents, especially underrepresented regions. Our aim is for the partnership to become the global focal point for inclusive, rights-based discussion and activities on responsible artificial intelligence. With that in mind, we invite all of you to join and leverage the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence to advance our shared commitment to revitalize the rules-based international system and strengthen democratic values. We stand ready with our Alliance for Multilateralism partners to build a global digital ecosystem that protects human rights online, promotes responsible innovation, and fosters diversity and inclusion. Thank you.
Very much for your speech, Your Excellency. Thanks a lot. In our next intervention, we will focus on the role fake news and misinformation is playing in regard to human rights. And we are glad to hear now from Christophe Deloire. He is chair of the Forum on Information and Democracy. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, democracies need trusted third parties in the public debate. Due to their independence, methods, and ethical rules, journalists are supposed to play this role. But the survival of journalism is nowadays at stake. The successes of a few champions and a few innovative projects should not obscure the numerous media disappearances, the reduction in the size of editorial staff, and what can be considered as a market failure. Digital platforms capture value. They distort competition by abolishing the distinction between trustworthy content and other forms of content, sponsored news, influencers, state propaganda, rumors, etc. The context of the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbates this crisis by an increase in the costs of the press and a drop in revenues with advertisers cutting spending. This is why the Forum on Information and Democracy has decided to launch a working group on the sustainability of journalism. The full report will be completed and made public later in May and addressed especially to the 42 countries which endorsed the Partnership on Information and Democracy. I would just like to highlight in advance 5 major lines of action. First, imposing fair distribution of revenues. Those who produce the information should receive the income generated by the distribution and commercial exploitation of that content. The platforms must pay publishers for the content. Public authorities must impose agreements. Second potential line of action, implementing corrective and supportive taxation. If the platforms do not respect this obligation of agreement, the authorities should impose a corrective taxation on them. In addition, authorities should strengthen tax incentives for media development and transition to digitalization. Third point, developing transparent and politically neutral press aid. The authorities must consider putting in place a press support system based on transparent and politically neutral criteria. Fourth point, facilitating a new foundation statute for the media. The governments and the parliaments should create, and when it exists, facilitate the development of a foundation statute for the media to guarantee their independence from investors, their long-term sustainability, and the increase of new resources. And fifth, and last one for the moment, dedicating a part of ODA to public interest media. Some of the ODA goes to democracy, but almost none to the media. A much larger part of ODA in the framework of democracy should be intended to support the media, the public interest media. As a final point, public policies have to be developed to support trustworthy news and information. But a key question is how to distinguish those who deserve the support. Who is exercising journalism and who is not? This becomes particularly important in the light of current debates around redistribution mechanisms where eligibility criteria are key. No sensible government wants or should decide which media outlet is a legitimate one. That's why Reporters Without Borders, RSF, has been developing the Journalism Trust Initiative, JTI, a solution based on an ISO type standard. JTI was developed under the aegis of the European Standardization Committee by stakeholders from all over the world. The implementation will start in a few weeks. It will favor a due prominence system for trustworthy news and information. We are available for discussing it with appropriate stakeholders in all your countries. The Forum on Information and Democracy is also available for the implementation of the 250 recommendations we published last November during the Paris Peace Forum to address the issue of infodemics and information chaos. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christophe Deloire. Thanks a lot. Well, cyberspace is not the only challenge for human rights. Also, climate change has negative impacts for a whole range of human rights. And this is the issue of our next panel round. And I'm happy to introduce to you our next distinguished speakers. We are glad to hear from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. We are looking forward to get the speeches from foreign ministers of Costa Rica, Kenya and the Maldives, and we're glad to hear from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Here we go. So welcome to all of you. We will start with an intervention by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet. She speaks about climate change, women and human rights. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, I am delighted that the Alliance for Multilateralism has been again to strengthen its important contribution to multilateralism and to human rights. Earlier this week, we heard the Secretary General speak powerfully about his call to action for human rights. This framework emphasizes the need to advance gender equality and women's rights, even in the face of today's setbacks. It recognizes the need for climate justice, and it urges a stronger multilateralism. I am convinced that this new and stronger multilateralism, built on human rights principles, is indeed very powerfully needed today. The world faces the interlinked emergencies of climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. They share a root cause, and it is a preventable root cause: environmental degradation. This underscores the immediate need for global recognition of the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. COVID and climate change also share many victims. Both disproportionately impact people already burdened by discrimination because of their sex, because of poverty, because of indigenous or minority status, or for other reasons. As a result, both deepen inequalities, sharpen grievances, and heighten social tensions. We urgently need to begin acting on some of the lessons we can draw from this convergent crisis. Let me propose one key lesson. We will not ensure a sound and sustainable future for our planet and peoples if we continue to ignore gender inequality and the marginalization of many discriminated groups. The heightened impact of both this crisis on women and girls has been economically, socially, and culturally constructed, which means we can dismantle it. Discriminatory laws, policies, and practices need to be eradicated. Legal and practical reforms must uphold the equal rights of women and girls within the family, in access to resources, skills, and technologies, and in the public sphere. My second lesson: we need to join up our solutions. As we work to recover from COVID-19, we need to rebuild our human rights for inclusive, sustainable policies and embrace climate-positive solutions that will heal our environment. This brings me to my third point. The truly global nature of both this crisis and the great magnitude of the potential implications requires a determined and global response that leaves no one behind. We must resist protectionism and uphold multilateralism based on global solidarity. In other words, the world is sorely in need of the action and support this alliance can bring. I look forward to your discussions, and I thank you for standing up for human rights.
Thank you so much for your intervention, Michelle Bachelet. Our next speaker is with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The Executive Secretary, Patricia Espinosa, is with us. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we recently marked the 5th anniversary of the adoption of the Paris Agreement. When the gavel came down in 2015, it was a victory for global efforts to address climate change. It was also a victory for multilateralism and a ray of hope for all people, especially the most vulnerable. that rapid, transformative, and equitable climate action was imminent. Nations have made some progress, most significantly in 2018, with the establishment of implementation guidelines for the agreement. But we still do not have full implementation. After 5 years, the negotiations are still not complete, and our worsening climate change emergency is now exacerbated by a global pandemic. In 2021, we have difficult choices to make with respect to prioritizing spending, choices that will impact the world for the decades to come. So ensuring the post-COVID economic recovery is directed towards greener, cleaner, healthier, more sustainable, and climate-friendly growth is the single greatest investment we can make in our collective future on Earth. It is a transition that must be shared by all, especially the most vulnerable. Great shifts of the past, economic or otherwise, left the most vulnerable behind, and we must ensure they are not marginalized or ignored in this transition, as has been so eloquently presented by High Commissioner Bachelet. This is especially true of women who have been told their role is to be good, to be quiet, and to bear the burdens of decisions they've had no part in making. The biggest global issues, however, whether climate change, poverty, energy, equality, human rights, or more, will never be solved if 50% of the population is left out of discussions, as well as leadership roles related to those discussions. It's the same when it comes to the engagement of nations. We know that global issues of the magnitude I just mentioned, can only be addressed and solved through multilateralism. To that end, and from the perspective of UN climate change, re-establishing leadership and trust this year, especially at COP26 in November, is crucial to everything I have been talking about in these remarks. The climate change agenda and multilateralism reinforce the other. It's why success at COP26 is about more than climate change. It's about more than building forward from COVID-19. It's an opportunity to renew confidence and credibility in multilateralism itself, the residual benefits of which cannot be understated. Success in the climate change arena could, by providing tangible evidence and value of global cooperation, trigger progress on a variety of topics, including fulfillment of the SDGs and more. The fact is that multilateralism isn't in a great place right now throughout the world. With success at COP26, we can bolster confidence in it. At UN Climate Change, we've gone further, introducing the concept of inclusive multilateralism. And this means bringing together regional and local governments, citizen communities, businesses, investors, and everyday citizens to boost their climate ambition and action in an overall unity of purpose. Why? Because we know inclusion, multilateralism equals success. We know it because we have the evidence. Whether it's the eradication of smallpox, curing polio, efforts to repair the ozone layer, the dramatic reductions in extreme poverty in the last half century, and much more. So, dear colleagues, we stand at a unique point in history, a decisive point many of us may never again witness. This is our chance, our time to get it right. But the only way forward is by reinforcing the pillars of multilateralism, being successful at COP26, and using that momentum to propel us forward on other issues, including poverty, human rights, equality, equitable access to energy, and more. And I certainly look forward to working together with all of you. Thank you very much.
Patricia Espinosa, thank you very much for your speech. Well, we are moving now to Costa Rica. The Foreign Minister Rodolfo Solano Quiros will contribute to the Geneva Pledge for Human Rights and Climate Action. Federal Minister Heiko Maas earlier emphasized the relevance of this topic and this initiative. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellencies, dear Heiko, dear Minister Le Drian, dear colleagues. Good morning from the warm and blue sky, Costa Rica. I appreciate to be given once again this opportunity to share with all of you in the frame of the Alliance for Multilateralism. This alliance was established to reinforce the fact that today there are few challenges that can be solved solely by one state. We are a community and we must act as such. We must support each other to move forward together in solidarity. The Human Rights Council adopted its first resolution of human rights and the environment in 2011. This was followed by the establishment of a mandate of the independent expert on human rights and environment, later renamed to the Special Rapporteur. Costa Rica is pleased to be part of the core group on human rights and the environment that has promoted the discussion on an issue that increasingly takes higher priority for the development of our state's policies and our struggle against climate change and environmental degradation. We are all affected by the current global health crisis due to COVID-19. And it is up to all of us to find joint solutions. Our relationship with nature has to be transformed in a more sustainable one without delay. I speak here today to call upon you to join Costa Rica in this action to leave short-term political gains behind and be courageous in order to act on a long-term vision, one that respects and upholds intergenerational equity and justice. This emergency offers to all of us the opportunity to promote transformation rather than change. We need a green, inclusive, and sustainable reconstruction beyond simple recovery. Costa Rica believes that the environmental agenda is a priceless tool to rebuild better on the basis of sustainable development models with a systematic approach that guarantees the well-being of all people, of all our people. The context of the global pandemic that we have lived through 2020 convinces us more than ever that access to accurate and timely information is necessary for making informed decisions. Costa Rica attached the highest importance to freedom of expression and press. It works permanently to strengthen it at the multilateral and regional levels, promoting independence and media literacy. Costa Rica is highly convinced that pandemic emergency must not be used to limit any human rights, cannot limit any human rights, such as freedom of the press and expressions. Furthermore, we believe that in situations such as the one we live today, internet access must be reaffirmed and considered as a fundamental element to foster human development and democracy. Multilateralism is built on facing common challenges together with political will, constructive dialogue, diplomacy, negotiation, and committed work with diverse partners. In Costa Rica, we remain convinced that together, through joint efforts, we will find once again this common path. We look at multilateralism as a fundamental way to reconstruct a better future. My dear friends, let's keep working together. Let's do it together. It's time. It's time for us to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thanks a lot. Now we are moving to Kenya, and we are welcoming now the Foreign Minister, Her Excellency Rachel Awar Omamo. Looking forward to your intervention.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to join you today, and may I express my gratitude to the Human Rights Council and the Alliance of Multilateralism for convening this event. Ladies and gentlemen, although the impact of climate change are severe for all humanity, developing countries, particularly in Africa, are most vulnerable, even though they are the least polluters. The adverse effects of climate change lead to the disruption of the enjoyment of some basic human rights, such as the right to life, the right to personal safety, the right to work, the right to housing, to food, to water, to sanitation, to health, to education. Indeed, climate change threatens the whole spectrum of what we deem to be fundamental human rights. Women who are traditionally disadvantaged regarding access to societal decision-making power and to economic resources experience more risks and encumbrances during climate-related disasters than men do. Climate change shocks generate the massive dislocation of populations and expose women and children in particular to the risks of sexual and gender-based violence as they are uprooted from their homes and communities. Moreover, during periods of drought and episodes of flooding, access to maternal health care is often interrupted, thereby placing the lives of women at risk. Also, irregular rainfall patterns compromise the harvest of crops, thus impacting the incomes of women, who are the majority of farmers in developing countries. Extreme weather also undermines the education of girls and exposes them to early marriages and other retrogressive cultural practices. Similarly, climate change disseminates natural resources and can lead to a surge in organized crime, especially drug and human trafficking, and sadly, the kidnapping of women and children. Climate change is therefore not only an economic and environmental and political issue, it is at its most fundamental a human rights issue. It manifests at the human scale. It directly and indirectly impacts internationally guaranteed human rights with serious adverse effects for women. The COVID-19 pandemic is teaching us the need for resilience, agility, and solidarity in addressing novel challenges. But I must reiterate that a strong and resilient system emanates from enhanced preparedness at the national level first, and then at the multilateral level. This must be anchored on broader strategic foresight, as well as forward-looking rights-based measures to address climate change. Adaptation strategies and measures need to target the most vulnerable. Not only must states limit the emissions of greenhouse gases, but climate adaptation and mitigation strategies also need to tap into women's agency and knowledge at strategic and operational levels, locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally. Adaptation and mitigation initiatives must also speak to the gender-specific impacts of climate change, including the differentiated vulnerabilities and needs of women and men. The Paris Agreement provides for women's empowerment, and therefore adherence to this commitment in the agreement is paramount in realizing its aspirations. Ladies and gentlemen, as the host of UNEP and the UN Habitat, Kenya has a long tradition of championing conservation and environmental protection, as well as advocating for the development of environmentally sustainable human settlements and resilient cities. As a member of the UN Security Council, we'll continue building global consensus on the interlinked paradigm of security, climate, and sustainability at a time when climate change has become a global emergency and a severe threat to the human rights and well-being of women, particularly women in fragile and conflict-ravaged contexts. In conclusion, let me reiterate the need for global solidarity in climate action. We need more multilateralism than ever before, a multilateralism with a human face, a multilateralism that sees and makes women visible. Therefore, more ambition, more gender-responsive solutions to climate change are required. They are required urgently. Climate change is a human rights problem, and adaptation and mitigation must also be anchored on human rights. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much indeed for your intervention. Thanks a lot, Your Excellency. So we are glad that the Foreign Minister of the Maldives is joining us as well, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid. He addresses the Generation Equality Forum, Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, warmest greetings to everyone who is joining us for this event around the world. It is an honor for me to address you on this panel with these distinguished speakers on a topic which is crucial for my country. The nexus between climate change, human rights, and gender has always been clear to the Maldives. Rise in global temperatures and sea level, coupled with extreme weather events and changes in precipitation, are directly or indirectly impacting the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights in all our countries. As I acknowledge progress made over the years on integrating human rights into the climate agenda, I'm also cognizant there are many aspects that require significant focuses, especially the gender-related impacts of climate change. This must obviously build on existing efforts. For instance, at COP25, we were pleased to welcome the 5-year Enhanced Lima Work Programme on Gender and its Gender Action Plan, which is a significant step in gender-responsive climate action. However, these actions need to be more closely interlinked with gender-specific goals and targets under other international frameworks and instruments as well. They also need to be more urgent, given the rightly ambitious timelines that we have set for achieving global gender parity. In this context, the Maldives is committed to driving holistic, scaled up, and enhanced action, including through the Generation Equality Forum, which kicks off in Mexico at the end of March this year. As you may be aware, this forum, convened by UN Women, aims to secure concrete, ambitious, and transformative commitments to achieve immediate and irreversible progress towards gender equality through 6 action coalitions. The Maldives is a co-lead of the Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. The work of the coalition aims at producing a list of focused and concrete actions that can deliver maximum results and formulating principles to inform and guide these actions. I encourage all of you to actively engage and contribute to the work of these coalitions to deliver effective outcomes at the forum. It is clear that our aspirations from the Beijing conference 25 years ago still have not been realized, and a more targeted and integrated approach is required. An approach that catalyzes not only governments, but also civil society, private sector, academia, and all aspects of the community. This is precisely what Generation Equality Forum strives to achieve, and we look forward to working with everyone to generate tremendous momentum and commitments ahead of the meetings in March and June. Climate change is a war that mankind has ignorantly waged with nature. But I believe that women have the potential to lead the way to peace and harmony with nature. To achieve a greener, more sustainable, and more prosperous future, we must empower, honor, and respect all women and girls. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you for your interventions. It was highly interesting listening to you. And before we continue with our next panel, I would like to take the chance and put a question to the French Foreign Minister, Le Drian, to get a brief assessment in between, maybe. Your Excellency, could you please draw an operational conclusion from the two panels on new dimensions on human rights as we will move to the pandemic response and preparedness aspect now?
I find that the exchanges of these two panels were of very great quality, and they'll be very useful to us, I think, with the very important timeline that we have in front of us. There will be the Generation Equality Forum that the Minister of the Maldives has just mentioned. There will be the 3COP Summit, which will be held in September to support mobilization for the environment and the climate. And then there will be the summit, which will be the first summit of the Initiative for Information and Democracy that will be organizing next September, the margin of the General Assembly of the United Nations. So all of this, I think, makes sense. Following on those two panels, I would invite you all to meet again in the Partnership for Information and Democracy, which was a very important partnership that's been mentioned several times during these panels. And now we'll go on to health in our third panel. And here, I think we all have in mind the World Health Assembly in May, which is a meeting that should allow us to make progress toward reform for the WHO, which is clearly necessary given the current pandemic. And I think that we all need to be mobilized. In our context here, this is our mission. We need to coagulate, if you will, all the good will which can be organized around these very important subjects.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Well, as the Minister just outlined, our next panel will deal with the issue of health, and we will put the COVID-19 pandemic in the focus. We want to examine ways of reinforcing the international community's preparedness and response to future health crisis. And I'm glad to introduce to you now the speakers of our next panel round. In this panel, we are happy to welcome the designated Director General of the WTO, the High Representative of the EU, and the Foreign Ministers of Spain and of Norway. Happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us. So, first of all, it's a great pleasure to introduce the first speaker on this panel. She was just designated as a new Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. She is perfectly placed, I think, to speak about the role of trade in order to plan and prepare for future pandemics. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to congratulate the Human Rights Council, the foreign ministries of Germany and France, and the Alliance for Multilateralism, for putting together this important meeting. I've been asked to speak on lessons learned from the pandemic and what they mean for equitable access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, all the commodities needed to fight the pandemic. So I'm going to talk about two lessons and then draw some conclusions about what they mean for equitable access. The first one is that the COVID-19 pandemic has showed us one thing: how unprepared the entire world was. The world health systems, countries' health systems all over the world were unprepared to deal with the problem of the global commons, such as the pandemic. Public health and preparedness is one of the most seriously underfunded areas in the world, and we have just seen it. But the costs of preparing are just a small fraction of the cost of response, as this pandemic, what has happened now, has also shown us. The pandemic showed us how interconnected we are. We can't get away from one another. And this saying that no one is safe until everyone is safe may now sound trite, but it is true. And we had no mechanism for a global response that would ensure that poor and rich countries alike, poor and rich people alike, would get equitable and affordable access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. So if no one is safe till everyone is safe, then it is in the self-interest of rich countries to make sure that poor countries are accorded equitable and affordable access to all the medical commodities. This is even more so now because of the way that variants are multiplying all over the globe. It's very urgent that we act together. We know the human costs of inequity of access in public health emergencies. It's very high. People die. This happened with the H1N1 in 2009 when rich countries bought up all the vaccines and poor countries did not have access. We can even go further back to the HIV/AIDS pandemics when poor countries and poor people could not afford the $10,000 needed for treatment, and they had to wait 10 years before they could get access to affordable drugs. People died needlessly. So we, of course, are familiar with the human cost. We are less familiar, but we know now that the economic cost of inequity of access are also very high. We've now seen the recent study by the International Chambers of Commerce that showed that if rich countries vaccinate their populations and poor countries don't have access, the world, it will cost, in terms of global GDP, $9 trillion. The IMF has estimated that if we continue on this path of inequitable access, we will lose $28 trillion in global output by 2025. So there's a real economic cost to inequities. Developed countries would bear a good part of these costs. So it's not something that would happen to poor countries alone. It will happen to rich and poor alike. So how do we come to a global solution that can help us now to respond and prepare us better for the next pandemic? This is through multilateralism, and that is why this forum is so important. It's through global solidarity, such as is demonstrated by the ACT Accelerator Initiative, an initiative of the international community along with the WHO, Gavi, CEPI, and other organizations to make sure that there's equitable and affordable access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, particularly for poor countries. The international community is to be commended for launching this effort in April 2020. It's a unique collaboration. Actually, it's the only game in town for access, equitable and affordable access to poor countries. The ACT Accelerator's job is to accelerate the development of tools to fight the disease along the line of three pillars: diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. For the vaccines pillar, we are all now familiar with the COVAX facility, which has been developed with 92 low and low middle income countries enrolled to get vaccines at subsidized rates. And another 94 self-financing countries also enrolled. Estimates for funding equitable and affordable access tools through the ACT Accelerator have been estimated at $33 billion. To date, following the recent G7 summit, where $4.3 billion was pledged, we now have a total of $10.3 billion, leaving a gap of $22.9 billion for this year. Many countries have come together to make these commitments, from the EU to the G7 members to non-G7 like Norway to G20 members. And they deserve commendation for their efforts. But obviously, what has been pledged now is not enough. ODA cannot solve this problem. We must find new and innovative ways to fill that gap of $22.9 billion that we're waiting for. This is a minuscule percentage of what is being implemented as fiscal stimulus, especially in the rich countries, where the IMF has estimated 21% of GDP fiscal stimulus in these countries, trillions of dollars. And so 33 billion is a tiny fraction of this. And I know it is not easy politically to say that you support what is happening outside of your own boundaries. So one is not naive about that. But as I said before, it's actually in the self-interest of everyone in these countries, rich and poor, to make sure that this affordable and equitable access happens. So we need to close that gap. Let me go to my second important lesson, and the final one. I'm only doing two. And that is that the pandemic, there has been inadequate investment in manufacturing capacity, actually in development, manufacturing, and procurement capacity for this pandemic, especially where it concerns vaccines. And today we are seeing the impact. Today there's a supply constraint that is serious because we've not invested enough in production capacity. This issue is compounded by supply chain problems and a lack of transparency on vaccine pricing, leading in some cases to price gouging and to limited supplies. And this makes it much more difficult when we talk about this affordable and equitable access. In addition, we have export prohibitions and restrictions by country. To date, there are about 100 countries that have these export restrictions and prohibitions, which we need to act to get rid of. And this is one of the places where trade can contribute a good solution to the pandemic. So these issues threaten to undermine COVAX and its timely delivering of vaccines to poor countries. Most developing countries are waiting today to receive their vaccine supplies, while others have already done half their populations. So this present inequity has led poor countries and developing countries to demand a waiver of the intellectual property rights under the TRIPS agreement of the WTO. They argue that this would free countries to manufacture. Many more countries could manufacture the needed commodities to supply to their population at affordable prices. But another group of countries, the developed countries, feel that the present flexibilities that are available under the TRIPS agreement are adequate and you don't need to waive these rights. What I'm advocating is what I call a third way. So whilst this argument is raging, we need to find a solution that can save lives. And the private sector is already ahead of us. The private sector companies, the pharma companies like AstraZeneca, have already gone ahead with voluntary licensing agreements, and they seem willing to do more. So this is one way we can immediately respond. And I'd like to encourage us to do that, to maximize production in emerging market and developing countries. Let us work with these companies to see if many more countries can open up production, such as they've done with the Serum Institute of India. I think we should focus on this. In particular, for vaccines, it's not only intellectual property rights that are important, but technology transfer and know-how. even if you have the rights and you don't have this know-how and technology transfer, you will not be able to do it. So we must encourage this third approach of voluntary licensing as quickly as possible whilst we debate the issues of the intellectual property rights. So we need to work with the private sector. We need to work with these companies to make sure that they do what is right. If we do this, this will complement what the COVAX facility is doing. At the same time, we work to remove the export restrictions so that trade does not become a stumbling block, but actually becomes a complementary solution, brings a complementary solution to what we already have working on the ground. All this taken together will make affordable and equitable access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics much more realistic and much more timely for poor countries. So let me conclude by going back to where I started. We must learn the lessons of this pandemic now because we need to solve problems now. There's an urgency. We can't afford to wait. And we must focus on these solutions, not only for now, but also as a framework for being prepared for the next pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention, and thank you for joining us today. So let me welcome our next speaker, and this is Josep Borrell, High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Union. And he talks about preparedness and response to health emergencies and about draft resolution on strengthening the WHO. So please.
Dear colleagues, I want to thank my friends Heiko Maas and Jean-Yves Le Drian for convening this meeting of the Alliance for Multilateralism. As the European Union, we believe in multilateralism. Sure. Why? Because it works. Agreed rules and strong institutions are the best and the only credible answer to a multipolar and unequal world. Ending the pandemic, climate action, standards on technology that reflect our values, all these depend on global cooperation. You have just published a new strategy on what we as European Union can do to strengthen multilateralism. Because talking about multilateralism is good and maybe easy, but surely it's not enough. We have to invest in it. And that's what we intend to do, working with our partners, with governments, but also business, NGOs, academics, and others. We need to build broad coalition. Dear colleagues, the pandemic has highlighted that when the problems are global in nature, so must be the solutions. And right now, the entire world is focusing on getting vaccines. And again, we must work for a multilateral solution. Let's remember that we need the whole world vaccinated and not just ourselves and our neighbors. And we must vaccinate faster than the virus mutates, as new strains of the virus can spread among unprotected populations and mutate further. This is why the European Union is supporting the WHO, including by being the biggest donor to the effort. We support the capacities of partners to handle the broader effects of the health crisis. Also looking beyond this pandemic, we must reinforce the global health system to learn the right lessons and to make it fit for purpose, so that next time we are better prepared. The EU strongly supports the World Health Organization and its transformation agenda. We welcome in this regard very much the US decision to re-engage with the WHO and want to mobilize broad support for the EU-led resolution on the strengthening of the WHO for adoption by the World Health Assembly next May. Our EU delegation in Geneva will be engaging with all members of the WHO in the days and weeks ahead. I count on your support. Let us work together to ensure that the WHO has the necessary mandate and resources to do its job. In the field of health and pandemics, as in other areas, we need to ensure that the supply of multilateral efforts matches the demand. This will not happen by itself, and this is why I welcome the important work of this alliance of multilateralism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josep Borrell, for your strong statement. So let's go to Spain now. Foreign Minister Arantxa González Laya is waiting for us. She will talk about the Charter for Equitable Access to COVID-19 Tools. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Astrid, and thanks to Heiko and to Geneva for bringing us together again. The fact of the matter is that we are at a crucial moment in our fight against COVID. Crucial in terms of ensuring equitable and affordable access to vaccines and treatment. Crucial in terms of preparedness and response, because we still have to face new variants. And crucial also in terms of framing this fight for future pandemics. Let me briefly discuss each one of these three crucials that I have on my list. And let me start by saying that what we do in the next months will be decisive for our success or for our collective failure. And this is why the only means to ensure it's a collective success is to do this multilaterally. And this is why this links with the conversation that we are having today. It also links with the initiative that Spain and Sweden, together with 9 other countries, launched last year with what we call Together for Stronger Multilateralism, which is a program of work for acting together. Let me start briefly on ensuring equitable and affordable access to vaccines. This is where the Charter for Equitable Access hits the road. This is where we will see whether or not we meant it when we subscribed to the Charter. What the Charter says is public investments, public research investments to develop vaccines. Thus is, as we have seen, crucial to scale up production of discovery and production of vaccines, sharing of data, essential to fight against new variants, to do the let's say, investigation of the new variants by sharing the data, essential on technology transfer to ensure that we benefit from the collective investments into research, reinforcing health systems and collective financing, which is what COVAX is about. So the Charter and the principles in the Charter are proving to be essential to ensure affordable and equitable access to vaccines. It's very heartening to see COVAX delivering its first batch of vaccines to Ghana just this morning. It shows that the system is working, but the reality is that, as we just heard from Ngozi, we need to do more and we need to do this faster. On the European Union side, we are leveraging more financing into COVAX. And Spain also thinks that more needs to be done by member states in sharing the vaccines that they have purchased as individual member states, and to channel these vaccines through COVAX. This is what the Spanish Prime Minister will be pushing for in the European Council that will happen tomorrow. The reality is that we still have too many poor countries, too many poor people in middle-income countries. Let's not forget that this is not just about poor countries, it's also about poor people in richer countries, and also about ensuring vaccines reach people in humanitarian context. We cannot leave them behind. On the second item, which is preparedness and response, I think there the World Health Organization, the Health Assembly of the month of May should be our arrival point, our destination, in order to adopt a set of mechanisms that will help us in preparing and responding. And third and final, on the International Treaty on Pandemics. I think this is a very important ingredient that we could add to our toolbox by transforming what is today international health regulation into an international treaty on pandemics that will help by putting together all the lessons we have learned in fighting COVID to face the next pandemic, which, whether we like it or not, we surely will have to face. So thanks again. Very briefly, so that we can listen to our colleagues, and happy to continue to collaborate on this good endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your clear messages. And I would like to pass over the mic to Ine Søreide, Foreign Minister of Norway, in order to get her perspective on this issue.
Thank you very much. Dear Heiko, cher Geneva, dear colleagues, good friends, thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to our discussion on pandemic preparedness and response, and not least how we can learn from this pandemic. I can actually not think of any other worthy topic under the umbrella of Alliance for Multilateralism. And global cooperation is actually the only solution to threats that transcend borders, as this pandemic really does. The current pandemic has really also exposed some weaknesses in our global and national health systems. It has led to the loss of over 2 million lives and has disrupted billions more. It has also challenged fundamental freedoms and also the rule of law. And it has really also been a stark reminder of the importance of multilateralism in the face of what is a truly global challenge. So Norway has emphasized international cooperation in our pandemic response. One very important element of this is our role as co-chair of the Facilitation Council of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, or the ACT Accelerator. That is actually a unique global collaboration of public and private stakeholders. It aims to accelerate the development, production, and equitable access of COVID-19 tests, treatments, and vaccines. It's our only comprehensive global solution to expedite the end of the pandemic, or as Ngozi said so eloquently, it's the only game in town. Well, the ACT Accelerator was initiated by the G20 and established by the EU and the WHO. It is co-chaired by South Africa and Norway. So I would like to highlight 3 factors which will be decisive in determining the success of this collaborative effort in the coming months. The first thing is that our approach must remain comprehensive in nature, because effective vaccines are essential. We must, however, not forget that tests and medicines also make up crucial elements of a pandemic response. It is the combination of globally available diagnostics, treatments, vaccines, general infection control, and contact tracing measures that actually will provide the necessary impact. My second point is that our approach must remain equitable in reach. Right now, we are seeing an uneven distribution of COVID-19 tools globally. Most vaccines have so far been rolled out in just a few high-income countries. Over 190 economies participate in the vaccine pillar of the ACT Accelerator, the COVAX facility. And in the next few weeks, COVAX vaccines will start to arrive in low and middle income countries. Heiko mentioned that the first flight landed today in Ghana with vaccines from COVAX. And on Friday, as far as I know, there will be shipments to Côte d'Ivoire, and the vaccinations and administration of vaccines will start early next week. Norway further plans to reallocate doses to COVAX, and I would strongly encourage others to do the same, because our race against the mutating virus indeed confirms that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Our approach must not least be financed. The ACT Accelerator faces an acute funding gap. We must go beyond health and development budgets. So Norway has therefore led efforts to develop a comprehensive financing framework for the ACT Accelerator. I'm very encouraged by the leadership shown by several G7 countries who made new commitments totaling $4 billion on Friday. And the US message that they are engaging in the global vaccine work is really encouraging. So I hope that others will follow suit in the coming weeks and months. We must also apply a gender perspective in the responses when we go forward and ensure that the post-pandemic recovery is non-discriminatory and based on human rights and the rule of law. That's the only way we can ensure that no one is left behind. And although we are in the midst of responding to the current pandemic, we must not lose sight of the longer-term perspective. We have to learn from this crisis and establish a more resilient emergency and response system for the future. So Heiko, Geneva, thank you very much for inviting.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Thanks a lot. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have talked about three important and very decisive aspects of human rights and global health in these panel discussions. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your ideas with us. Very inspiring. Thank you so much. We would like to open the discussion now. We have a lot of further interventions by other foreign ministers, and we are looking forward to hear more from you. Please let me remind that we have to keep the time discipline a bit, and we would appreciate if you could keep the time limit of 2 minutes for each speech. Thank you very much. So we would like to start now with our first speaker, the Foreign Minister of Chile, His Excellency Andrés Alamand Zavala. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Dear ministers, dear colleagues. I am sure we all agree that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on those most vulnerable, especially on the elderly, people living in poverty, people with disabilities, women and girls. It has also had considerable effects on our health systems, on our ways of life and our economies. Unfortunately, our most serious concerns associated with a weak order multilateral has been confirmed. Despite warnings from experts, we were not prepared to face a global challenge of this scale. I believe the main lesson we can learn from this crisis is that we need to take action. We need to take action to face global challenges when experts warn us of impending disaster, as it is also the case with climate change. We are compelled to take action if we want to be better prepared to respond effectively next time we are faced with a pandemic. Therefore, it is imperative to make the multilateral order work right now. The best way for better promoting this multilateral order is pushing forward initiatives that will demonstrate the effectiveness of cooperation among the international community members. In that respect, Chile proposed last year, in the context of the World Health Organization, to work in a legally binding global instrument on multidimensional preparedness and response to pandemics that should complement existing international norms, such as the international health regulations. Among other aspects, we put forward the discussion that this instrument should strengthen the international health regulations and its effective application, and should focus on vulnerable groups as such. We also believe that we could consider additional areas such as access to treatments and vaccines, the global health architecture, and economic response measures. In this sense, France and Germany, the US, Korea, and other countries have put forward similar initiatives. We welcome that the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, recently proposed the negotiation of an international pandemic treaty. We also value that last week G7 summit called, and I quote, exploring the potential value of a global health treaty. Along this line, Chile believes that an international binding agreement on such a crucial issue is necessary and should be negotiated, understanding that it will require technical and diplomatic efforts. We therefore call on all states of the alliance to be part of this process, so we can ensure we will be better prepared next time we are faced with such a critical and colossal challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Thank you, Dear Excellency. So we are going to Armenia, and we would like to welcome His Excellency Ara Aiwasyan. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I want to thank the organizers of this Ministerial for providing us with an opportunity to get together and discuss the ways of overcoming the challenges that multilateralism is facing today. Last September, Azerbaijan, with the direct involvement of Turkey and its affiliated foreign terrorist fighters, launched a pre-planned, large-scale military aggression against Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, and its people, causing thousands of casualties and wounded. In blatant breach of international humanitarian law and totally ignoring key tenets of multilateralism, Azerbaijan resorted to the use of force as a means for conflict resolution, thus also violating basic human rights of the people of Artsakh, including their right to self-determination. Many instances of war crimes, including of environmental nature by Azerbaijani armed forces, were registered. The dire consequences of this aggression are still to be addressed as Azerbaijan continues instrumentalization of humanitarian issues, such as the return of prisoners of war, delivery of humanitarian assistance, and protection of the Armenian cultural heritage. This act of aggression, in part, is a result of the crisis of multilateralism, failure of international order to deter the use of force by irresponsible actors and their enablers. Since one of the themes of this ministerial is the use of artificial intelligence, I would like to share my concerns on its military application. Cutting-edge technologies have been employed in the creation of the so-called killer robots or drones, and we have witnessed their devastating impact, especially at reckless hands. Azerbaijan utilized such technologies to bomb a cathedral of Armenian historical city of Shushay and a maternity hospital, among other civilian infrastructures in Nagorno-Karabakh. These facts come to prove yet again that the international control of the military application of artificial intelligence should be prioritized. The COVID-19 crisis shocked the world and revealed the gaps of the global healthcare system. Ensuring the timely, equitable, and fair access of immunization against the COVID-19 should be a priority in the recovery process. Rapidly unfolding climate emergency demands consistency and collective efforts. Global legal instruments and multilateral mechanisms are essential in mitigating the consequences of climate change. Armenia will continue advocating for a regional and international multilateral cooperation to address these and other global challenges. I thank you.
Much for your intervention. And we are moving now to Iceland. The Foreign Minister of Iceland is waiting for us, His Excellency Gudlugar Thorason. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, over the past year, the world has faced the enormous challenge of a global pandemic. It has underscored that in tackling global challenges, we need to pursue multilateralism and cooperation, not unilateralism and confrontation. And the global challenges of our times are many. First, securing human rights in the online environment is becoming ever more pertinent. Indeed, while modern technology has brought valuable benefits, it has also provided tools to negatively disrupt civil discourse, sometimes undermining our democratic values and freedom of media. Multilateral initiatives can play a key role in countering these trends, such as the Media Freedom Coalition, of which Iceland is a proud member. Second, as we jointly address our greatest common challenge, climate change, it is imperative to consider human rights in climate action. Climate change
change disproportionately affects the poorest and most vulnerable, not least women and girls. We therefore need to incorporate gender perspectives in all climate-related initiatives. Lastly, global health emergencies such as COVID-19 can only be addressed through concerted multilateral efforts. Equal access to vaccines is critical, and so is multilateral approach to the indirect economic and social impacts of the pandemic. Iceland is committed to play its part, including through support to Act A. It is also key that lessons from this pandemic feed into a strong global health, emergencies, preparedness, and response framework. In closing, multilateralism cannot be taken for granted. It needs to be continuously nurtured and adapted to the evolving global landscape. We are stronger together than apart.
Thank you so much for your intervention. And from Iceland, we are moving now to Austria, and we are greeting the Foreign Minister, His Excellency Alexander Schallenberg. Is he joining us already? It looks like he is not yet ready to speak. So what are we going to do? I'm asking just my colleagues now. Should we go on? Okay, so we will proceed now with Greece, and the Foreign Minister of Greece is ready to speak to us, His Excellency Nikos Dendias. Your floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Astrid, dear Heiko, Sir Jean-Yves, Your Excellencies. It is with great pleasure that I'm taking part in yet another meeting of the Alliance of Multilateralism. I strongly believe that, especially at this critical period, multilateralism constitutes one of the most important achievements of the international community. The most crucial issues of our time transcend borders by their very nature. This has been clearly emphasized by COVID-19. The pandemic has posed a threat not only to public health, but also to the very foundations of democracy. We strongly believe that strict adherence to human rights norms is the way ahead. Another issue of capital importance is climate change, which the Secretary General recently described as the defining issue of our time. Acknowledging the extreme severity of the problem, Greece undertook the initiative to convene in June 2019 in Athens an international conference entitled The Impacts of Climate Change on Cultural Heritage. Furthermore, we are prepared to host a high-level meeting on the same issue as soon as the pandemic shall permit. As far as the matter of the digital age is concerned, we must all agree that digital technology has already brought many benefits. Nevertheless, the potential risks are also huge. Consequently, we must ensure that digital issues will not have an adverse impact on human rights, including freedom of expression. Bearing in mind that global challenges require global solutions, we will continue addressing these challenges from a human rights perspective. And this, by taking all necessary steps to ensure that the rights of all people around the world are respected and that no one is indeed left behind. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for your words. And I would like to hand over the mic now to Portugal. The Foreign Minister, Professor Augusto Santos Silva, is waiting for us.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. This is really a very important topic, the lessons that we learned from the pandemic, because of course the pandemic has highlighted the need for global action, for solidarity among us. As a pandemic, it knows no borders, and its consequences have to be addressed by all of us. Portugal is, of course, aware of the importance of supporting more vulnerable countries and populations in their fight against COVID-19, and I would like to focus my intervention on this point, to support the most vulnerable countries and populations in their fight against COVID-19. We have been supporting multilateral efforts led by the United Nations system in response to the United Nations Secretary General appeal. And also we are developing bilateral initiatives with our closest partners, namely in Africa. We undertook various first response measures aiming to the pandemic prevention and the mitigation of its effects. And among these measures, I would like to point out redirecting development cooperation efforts to crucial sectors in the health system, making front-load disbursements and new financial contributions, stepping up the budget support to the health and education sectors, and approving time-bound suspension of bilateral debt service payments for eligible countries in Africa. And we designed and we are implementing a new health action plan for the sanitary response to the pandemic COVID-19 with our 6 closest partner countries, 5 in Africa, in the Portuguese-speaking Africa, and the other Timor-Leste in Asia. This has to do with planning and logistics of vaccine deployment processes, with the definition of priority groups, with the administration of vaccines, and with technical support to good vaccine administration and the training of the necessary human resources. No one is safe until everyone is safe. So I would like to underline that one of the main lessons we have to learn from the pandemic is the need to cooperate more to each other, and from a European point of view, to cooperate more with Africa and African countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Now we're going to Croatia, and I am greeting the Foreign Minister, Goran Grlić Radman. Hello. Yes, the floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Yes. Lieber Heiko, cher Genève, Excellencies, dear Minister, dear colleagues, I am very, very pleased to be with you today. Recently, we marked a 1-year anniversary since the outbreak of the COVID-19. With its severe effects on global health and economy, this crisis served as a reminder of the importance of solidarity and cooperation at all levels. Excellencies, under the leadership of the World Health Organization in coordinating our global response to the pandemic, we have come a long way. Croatia welcomes the resolution of strengthening the WHO aimed at successful international mobilization in striving for a better preparedness for the future health emergencies. As a country with a long tradition of the universal health coverage, we find it particularly important to ensure universal and equitable access to vaccines in order to bring the pandemic to an end. Dear colleagues, just like the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change and environmental degradation amplify social inequalities, leaving women much more vulnerable to climate impacts. In framing our response, we must bolster the role of women as significant actors in the society in disaster risk reduction and building resilience. We must approach the issue of climate change with the same determination we demonstrated in facing COVID. Croatia especially commends the Generation Equality Forum for its efforts in achieving gender equality within the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and hopes to contribute in future activities. In building back better, Croatia remains committed to One Health approach, seeking to protect the people while protecting the planet. Dear colleagues, COVID-19 revealed the growing potential of digitalization and artificial intelligence in many areas of life. But It also warned us about the negative impact digitalization may have on human rights and security. It is easier than ever to misuse technological achievements to intrude privacy, censor freedom of speech, of produce disinformation. Going forward, we should focus on strengthening research and development and multi-stakeholder dialogue and development of needed norms and regulations. Only in this way we benefit from the artificial intelligence without sacrificing our values. Croatia welcomes the increased engagement of international community on this topic, including the work presented by UNESCO. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Now we're looking forward to hear from the Foreign Minister of Romania. His Excellency Bogdan Aurescu is joining us.
Well, Excellencies, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address this meeting of the Alliance of Multilateralism. It is a timely opportunity to review the latest developments on essential topics. In order to overcome the current health crisis and its consequences, we must continue strengthening the rules-based multilateralism with the UN at its core and the World Health Organization's leading role in coordinating international action against the pandemic. Moreover, we must put multilateralism to work and ensure it leads to practical effects. Immunization against this coronavirus and other diseases is a prime global public goal. We must step up efforts to reduce the vaccine distribution gap between developed and fragile countries. Romania announced in December 2020 a first donation of 200,000 vaccine doses for the Republic of Moldova, thus echoing the Secretary General's appeal. I also welcome the proposal recently tabled by President Macron with the support of G7 countries and the European Commission's decision to double the EU contribution to COVAX. Such initiatives prove that we are indeed delivering. Looking towards our economic recovery, we must make sure that our policies ensure respect for human rights and strengthen social and economic resilience. Recovery policies must also take into account the needs of the most vulnerable. Women across the world are at the forefront of the fight against COVID-19 as first-line combatants in health, education, and social fields. They are also disproportionately affected by unemployment, job losses, school closure, domestic violence. It is our duty to place women and girls' rights at the center of the recovery efforts. I would like to express my gratitude towards France and Germany for convening this meeting. We should never forget that multilateralism matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your intervention. And now the Foreign Minister of Austria is online with us, Alexander Schallenberg. Your Excellency, yes, you're with us. So
yes, thank you.
The floor is yours now.
Danke sehr. Thank you, liebe Heiko, cher Jean-Yves, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. COVID-19 has been a brutal wake-up call. It has exposed in the most painful way possible the vulnerability of our societies and that previous progress, be it political, social, or economic, can easily be lost. And human rights are here no exception. Actually, they're at the front line. Let me underline in this context that we very much welcome the decision by the new US administration to re-engage in multilateral fora, such as the World Health Organization or the Human Rights Council. This recommitment closes a gap which could have become a dangerous vacuum. No crisis and no pandemic should prevent us from standing up for human rights. They are the fundamental pillar of any open and free society. However, this pillar is under threat. Some even seem to believe that they can use a pandemic as a carte blanche to silence critical voices, to ignore democratic elections, or to persecute minorities. Whenever and wherever this happens, be it in Myanmar, Venezuela, Russia, or Hong Kong, we have to draw a clear line. At present, one of the most important battlegrounds is the protection of human rights in the digital sphere. The pandemic has made us even more reliant on digital technologies. Yet, these technologies can become instruments of repression, while the digital divide reinforces existing discriminations. We have to make clear that whether something takes place offline or online makes no difference as far as human rights are concerned. Rapid advances in the field of artificial intelligence and robotics raise fundamental legal and moral questions. No more so than lethal autonomous weapon system. I believe that the Alliance of Multilateralism is well placed to raise awareness on this issue. We need a broad coalition of governments, NGOs, academia, and business. We must act before such weapons flood the battlefields and before an algorithm decides who lives and who dies. Austria will host an international conference on this issue in the second half of this year, and I invite all of you to join us in Vienna. Ladies and gentlemen, this global crisis has taught us one clear lesson. We will succeed or we will fail together. On protecting human rights, civil liberties, or our democratic values, failure is simply not an option. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schallenberg. Unfortunately, your picture was frozen, but we could hear you clearly, and we received your message very clear. Thank you. So we are moving now to Malawi. His Excellency Eisenhower Nduwa Mkaka is waiting for us, and we're looking forward to his intervention.
Co-chairs, ministers, distinguished delegates, I am pleased to be part of this session from the outset. I wish to reaffirm the Republic of Malawi's support to multilateral approaches in addressing global challenges. Effects posed by emerging global challenges continue to be multifaceted. Hence, today we are talking about threats which climate change, the digital age, and health crisis are posing on human rights. We are living in a world where both our actions and inactions are a threat to the inalienable enjoyment of human rights. Climate change, the cyberspace, and health crisis have led to massive compromises in protecting the rights of individuals across the globe. Our biggest challenge has been to find a balance of what and how relevant stakeholders should or should not do to ensure that human rights are not violated, even in the face of unpredictable events like the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted into various human rights abuses among the vulnerable groups like sexual molestation and discrimination. As the vaccine is being made available, it is important to ensure that everyone, including the most vulnerable groups, have easy access to it. I therefore wish to reiterate the call upon the international community to ensure that the vaccine is made a global public good. The cost for industrial and technological advancement to human rights is increasing each passing day. Despite its enormous benefits to mankind, the cyberspace remains one of the places where the human dignity, life, and other freedoms are at risk. If used properly, the cyberspace can empower vulnerable groups by giving them a voice which is denied in their societies. On the contrary, the cyberspace is used to bully the vulnerable members of our societies when they express themselves and stand up for their rights. We cannot let this trend continue. There is therefore need for collective effort to stop the abuse and misuse of the cyberspace. Governments must champion drafting and implementing of inclusive cybersecurity legislations which promote and protect rights of individuals. The impact of climate change on fundamental rights, including right to life, self-determination, food and housing, underscores the urgent need to address the climate problem. Multilateral commitments through frameworks like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change are a good starting point. As individual countries, we also need to continue setting ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse emissions. It is a given fact that humanity's quest for survival is and will continue to be one of the contributing factors to the problem of climate change. Hence, there is need to identify alternative sources of survival if we are to adequately deal with the problem of climate change. I thank you all.
Thank you very much for sharing your views with us. I would like to pass the mic over now to Malta, the Foreign Minister Evariste Bartolo. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Excellencies, dear colleagues. Thank you, Heiko, thank you, Geneva, for holding this meeting. This alliance, bringing together countries to work together, is needed more than ever before. Human rights are universal and not specific to a particular culture or political system. We need to promote human rights globally, but we need to do it with humility and without any self-righteousness. As US President Joe Biden said last week, democracy is fragile, that it must always be defended, that we must be ever vigilant. He was not talking about autocratic countries, but about the shortcomings that we have in our own societies. We need, and we will be more credible and effective if we are honest about our own shortcomings and how we work to overcome them. Let us not weaponize human rights by invoking them selectively and only where it is politically convenient for us, according to our geopolitical interests or where our markets for our sales are. We must get away from any technological fatalism and blame technology for fake news, killer robots, sexist and racist algorithms. It is not a matter of where technology is taking us, but where we are taking technology. Let us make sure that we shape technology to serve humanity in all areas of life. The pandemic has wreaked havoc on the media. Thousands of journalists have lost their jobs worldwide. Unless necessary steps are taken to help the media recover, our democratic and pluralistic societies, including human rights, will emerge severely damaged. I'm happy to say that one of the killers of Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia has admitted his guilt and is now in jail. We are moving ahead to bring all those involved to justice. Malta will also work together with all other countries in the Mediterranean to take the necessary climate action, as the rising sea level and recurrent droughts will destroy the social and economic human rights of millions of people in the region and in Africa. We must work together to save our planet and then make sure that human beings survive to enjoy it in freedom, prosperity, and diversity, where we all learn to live together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We are going to New Zealand. The Foreign Minister is waiting for us, Her Excellency Nanaia Saibel Mahuta, and I'm passing over the mic to her. If she is...
The global struggle against COVID-19 over this past year has been unprecedented. The pandemic has exacerbated existing human rights issues, including gender-based violence and socioeconomic inequalities, and it disproportionately affects the world's most vulnerable groups. The protection and realisation of universal human rights is being further challenged by the climate crisis and by new technology and cybersecurity issues that we are only beginning to understand. We must step up with political will and find global solutions to these urgent challenges. We have learned we must tackle the COVID-19 pandemic together with determination, good science and policy. A key part of this is to develop and distribute safe and effective vaccines on an equitable basis. We must fulfil the commitments of the Paris Agreement. We need to reform environmentally harmful subsidies and redirect these billions of dollars of public funds into transitioning to a low emissions, sustainable future. We must ensure the recovery respects and promotes the human rights of all. This includes accelerating action to achieve gender equality and ensure the empowerment of all women and girls. People across the world are now working, learning and socialising online because of COVID-19. It is vital for governments and industry to work together to ensure human rights are fully respected in the online world. Effective international cooperation matters more than ever before. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And we're moving from New Zealand to Estonia. Her Excellency Eva Maria Liimets is waiting for us. The floor is yours.
Distinguished moderator, ministers, excellencies, I would like to thank Germany and France for convening this meeting today. It takes a coordinated global effort to roll back a global suffering. When trying to build back better, we must constantly defend the universality of human rights and pay special attention to people in vulnerable situations. COVID-19 has shown how much we depend on technology and how much we need open, comparable and global data. Estonia, together with the World Health Organization, is working on global digital health data exchange, the Global Trust Framework. This shall enable the WHO to build trustworthy cross-border digital health services. While designing and using digital technologies, human rights, including the right to privacy, need to be respected. That is why Estonia is actively participating in the Secretary General's digital cooperation process to make sure that digital transformation does not happen at the expense of human rights. We must stand up for open, free and secure internet. We wish every success to Finland in guiding the activities of the Freedom Online Coalition this year. I am also glad to inform you that Estonia will host this year's Global Conference of the Media Freedom Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we are moving to Singapore, and I am greeting Her Excellency Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan.
Excellencies, the COVID-19 pandemic is the crisis of our generation. No country has been spared. Only a coordinated multilateral response can defeat it. Early on, Singapore advocated the need for global solidarity in tackling the pandemic. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong first articulated the need for vaccine multilateralism last June. This commitment to a framework of fair and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines recognizes that no one is safe until all are safe. We have, over the past year, developed unprecedented and innovative forms of multilateral cooperation to overcome this pandemic, including establishing the WHO-led ACT Accelerator and the COVAX facility. Singapore was an early supporter of the COVAX facility. We co-chair with Switzerland the informal Friends of the COVAX Facility group, which helped to catalyze support for the facility. Singapore has supported low and lower middle income countries through our contributions to the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment. The COVAX facility, with over 190 participants, has now started delivering vaccine doses. At this crucial juncture, we must continue to strengthen international cooperation to ensure fair and equitable access to vaccines for all and to keep these essential supply chains open. We must strengthen our collective response capabilities and our multilateral institutions to enable an inclusive and sustainable recovery for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And I'm passing over the mic to the Foreign Minister of Denmark, His Excellency Jeppe Kofod.
Our meeting today reaffirms our strong commitment to multilateralism and a rule-based international order. Once again, we underline that only through cooperation can we find sustainable solutions to our common challenges. I have previously addressed the Alliance on stepping up climate ambitions and the importance of providing a global response to COVID-19 to build back better and greener. Allow me therefore today to highlight the issue of ensuring human rights online. Promoting civil space offline and online is essential, and so is a promotion of a human rights-based approach to digital development. Denmark has put forward a new strategy for diplomacy. We commit to ensuring a responsible, democratic and secure technology development. Only cooperation between states, tech companies and civil society will solve this common challenge. Denmark is also pleased to be part of a core group behind the resolution on human rights and new emerging digital technologies. I find it important to make sure that the topic stays high on the Council's agenda. Our joint commitment to the Alliance for Multilateralism sent a strong and important signal to the world. In a time with immense pressure on human rights, we must continue to stand firm on our commitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. We are moving now to Australia, and I am passing over the mic now to Foreign Minister, Her Excellency Marise Payne.
It's a pleasure to join with colleagues in the Alliance for Multilateralism for the first time in 2021. COVID-19 has demonstrated the critical importance of working together to solve shared challenges. Australia has now concluded our first term on the United Nations Human Rights Council, and we remain committed to advocating strongly for human rights. Today's ministerial meeting has an important focus on the protection of human rights in the digital world. Australia is committed to ensuring the same rights exist online as offline. Cyberspace, critical technologies are expanding our opportunities for economic growth, innovation, and social connectivity. With the right safeguards, technology can expand human rights, including by enhancing freedom of expression or improving a transparent system of law enforcement. However, technology can also erode rights, such as privacy, through unfettered surveillance. Technology isn't value neutral. It depends on how we use it. To ensure it improves our lives, we must actively embed technology with our values and safeguards that ensure human rights are upheld, not curtailed. More people are online than ever before. During the COVID-19 pandemic, reliable information provided online by appropriate authorities has been vital to our responses and recovery. It has literally saved lives. However, at other times, we've seen technology used to infringe human rights during the pandemic. Australia has consistently condemned the misuse of technology to spread disinformation, to target political opponents and to silence journalists or health workers, human rights activists and others reporting on the pandemic or criticising official responses. It's all the more unacceptable when COVID-19 emergency measures are used to justify such oppression. Australia is a proud member of the Freedom Online Coalition. We will continue to support Human Rights Council resolutions on freedom of expression, the safety of journalists, human rights defenders, human rights and the internet, and civil society. It's essential that the international community, including governments, industry, and civil society, works together to manage these risks so we can harness the benefits of technology for all.
That was the perspective of Australia. Thank you very much. Now we are moving to Tunisia. His Excellency Othman Gerandi, the floor is yours.
At the outset, allow me, dear Heiko and Jean-Yves, to express my sincere appreciation for your leadership. My thanks also to the panelists for their presentations. We live in a world today with vast information and communication technology infrastructure and extensive flows of information that become natural and acquisitable features of modern life. The COVID-19 pandemic has also pushed us further into a more digitalized world and accelerated the path of fourth industrial revolution technology. In that context, we should answer a simple question. Is that becoming even more pressing, which is, what does it mean to be a human being in the digital age? Digital technologies already delivers many benefits. Their value for human rights and development is enormous. However, its unquestionable benefits do not cancel out its unmistakable risks, such as threats, incitement to hatred and violence, online harassment, trolling campaigns and intimidation, disinformation, and so on. All these abuses could lead a real-world targeting with a disproportionate impact on women and vulnerable groups. These challenges drive us back to the timeless principle of Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It provides a concrete legal foundation on which states and firms can build their response in the digital age. I reiterate in this regard Tunisia's commitment to fully promote human rights, value and principle in crisis and beyond, offline and online, in a free, open and safe internet as part part of sustainable development. In this respect, we look forward to the contribution of the 18th Summit of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie to be hosted by Tunisia later this year in Geneva on connectivity without diversity, digital as vector of development and solidarity in Francophone space, to collective efforts, and to enshrining the role of digital technology in promoting equitable development and advancing human rights, including human rights online. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And we are moving from Tunisia to Sweden now and looking forward to the intervention of Her Excellency Ann Linde.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first, I would like to thank Your Excellencies Heiko Maas and Jean-Yves Le Drian for gathering us to discuss new challenges and also opportunities for human rights. I also thank the distinguished panelists for their presentations. I was proud to participate in the first meeting of the Alliance 1 year ago at the margins of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. Little did we know then that the consequences of the pandemic would change also so much for so many. The pandemic has brought many lessons. The main one, perhaps, that global challenges require global solutions. Above all, the pandemic has taught us the importance of multilateralism, of global cooperation, and of global solidarity. I would like to briefly touch upon the three topics of today's event. First, protecting human rights online is a priority for Sweden. We should harness the possibilities brought by digitalization. However, the many challenges to human rights and democracy, also online, are concerning. All efforts to counter them must respect international law, including human rights, and include all stakeholders. Second, it is imperative to continue addressing the human rights implication of climate change and environmental degradation, and we must do so together. Thank you for raising these today. Lastly, vaccines give us hope, but will only truly work if they can be accessed globally. I believe 2021 will be critical in the fight against the pandemic and in preparing for the future health threats, with human rights and multilateralism at the core. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And I'm passing over the mic now to the Foreign Minister of Latvia, His Excellency Edgars Rinkēvičs.
Dear Heiko, dear Geneva, Excellencies, the Alliance for Multilateralism has become a useful framework for multilateral cooperation initiatives. Latvia gladly contributes to these efforts. Today's discussion on the protection of democratic values and human rights while addressing climate change and digital issues is very timely. I will touch upon a few areas which are closely linked to our joint efforts to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Considerable part of the spread of the virus is related to disinformation affecting people in every country. It is critical that all states step up countering misinformation. Latvia has taken an active leadership in raising awareness of disinformation also in the framework of international organizations. We will continue promoting media and information literacy as key long-term measures to address disinformation. Support for independent, pluralistic media, as well as safeguarding of freedom of expression, both online and offline, are important pillars of addressing disinformation. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted how interconnected we are. We need multilateral cooperation that delivers results. In order to tackle climate change, multilateral solutions and the implementation of the Paris Agreement must remain our priority. Latvia remains committed to this goal. Clean and healthy environment is a prerequisite for the enjoyment of human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, as the world strives to emerge from COVID-19 crisis, people and their rights must be at the center of global response and recovery efforts. By strengthening resilient democratic societies, we can be better prepared for future crises. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And we are moving now to Montenegro. His Excellency George Radulovic is waiting for us. The floor is yours.
Dear Ministers Mas and Ladrian, distinguished colleagues, it's my pleasure to address you today, 1 year after the first meeting of the Alliance in Geneva. Our aim is clear as the necessity for this initiative and the need for strengthening of multilateralism itself more visible than ever before. COVID-19 pandemic posed before us individually and collectively a challenge we have not witnessed for generations. Our shortcomings were made more apparent, so is the exigency for the stronger fundamentals of multilateralism, solidarity, and unity. Consequentially, the lasting crisis affected other challenges we are addressing, human rights being one of them. These challenges require our constant commitment, and we must not take them for granted. Furthermore, even though the pandemic has placed health on the forefront of issues, we should not omit the issue of the climate, as we need to go from the rhetoric to action. The pandemic did catch most of us off guard, but we have learned to adapt and act. While Montenegro is doing its best to act responsibly and to protect the health of our citizens, we count on solidarity and support in this vital moment. Dear colleagues, as a small country, multilateralism is not only our choice, but a guarantee of our prosperity. We remain firm and honest participant of the Alliance for Multilateralism, and individually we may be strong, but together we are stronger, and we must perceive multilateralism not as a possibility, but as a necessity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Now we are moving to Slovakia. His Excellency Ivan Korčok is now online with us, and we're looking forward to his speech.
Fellow ministers, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the organizers, the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Germany and France, for convening this ministerial meeting of the Alliance for Multilateralism in the margins of the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council. On behalf of Slovakia, I take this opportunity to reiterate our strong support for the Alliance's goals and initiatives and our readiness to engage with all members as a part of a broader effort to strengthen multilateralism. In this respect, it is encouraging that the new United States government has already announced a number of immediate actions to foster its multilateral role. This includes also engagement in the Human Rights Council. The pandemic, climate crisis, deepening of social inequalities, devastating conflicts, and the rise of digital technologies are increasingly pressing challenges. All of these have serious impact on human rights, but none of these can serve as a pretext to backslide or ignore our commonly endorsed human rights standards. New technologies allow for more interaction. This interaction is wider, is quicker, and simpler. However, these interactions are also misused. Hate speech, online censorship, widespread surveillance, and user-tailored access to information or disinformation. We need to use modern technologies, free and secure internet, while respecting others, their human rights and dignity. I call for strengthening the protection of journalists and human rights defenders who are currently under enormous pressure, as they are providing objective information. In countries like Belarus or Myanmar, safety of journalists and the freedom of the media are under massive attack. We all know what should be done to tackle these challenges. The action requires coordinated response. Therefore, we need essentially, first, a stronger, reformed and reinvigorated rules-based multilateralism with a more inclusive UN at its core. Second, modernization of key institutions such as the WTO and WHO. Third, development of new global norms, international standards, and cooperation frameworks in areas such as digital technologies, including artificial intelligence. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And our next speaker is Foreign Minister Bujar Osmani. He comes from North Macedonia and shares his view with us.
I would like to thank Ministers Jean-Yves Le Drian and Heiko Maas for organizing this meeting under the auspices of the Alliance for Multilateralism. The COVID-19 pandemic has been endangering economic stability and development. The already existing gap between developed and less developed countries is becoming even wider. COVID-19 has had a serious impact on the ability to enjoy fundamental human rights and freedoms worldwide. The inequality in accessing the vaccines additionally aggravated the situation, adding injustice to the overall suffering. My country, relying entirely on multilateral mechanisms in providing vaccines, is witnessing the consequences of the complete failure, indeed, of what we so strongly advocate in words. This inequality must be corrected immediately, and therefore, that would be my first and most important message. If we are not capable to foster solidarity, fairness, and equality in providing vaccines through multilateral mechanisms for immediate actions in saving lives, it would be even more difficult to find an appropriate response for the question of climate change and related human rights impact. As it is the case with COVID-19, the issue of climate change concerns us all, and we need common and coherent action. Therefore, multilateralism remains the only possible path for resolution of the global issues. In this endeavor, we must bring real essence to the notions of humanity, solidarity, fairness, and equity. Nothing discredits our pledge more to universality of human rights, including the gender and particularly vulnerable categories, than absence of these principles in practice.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And now we are moving to the Netherlands. His Excellency Stefan Blok is giving us his perspective now.
Thank you, Jean-Yves and Heiko, for inviting me to speak. Internet freedom and freedom of expression are a priority for the Dutch government. Everyone should have access to a safe and secure space online, with room for dialogue and diverse and critical opinion. Women and men, across political, ethnic, racial, religious and regional divides, should be able to come together online and express themselves freely. And yet, that is not a reality, as we have recently seen in Moscow and Minsk and Hong Kong, and as we are seeing now in Yangon. When citizens take to the street to protest against authoritarian governments, and media freedom is curtailed, and journalists are harassed, and the internet is censored, we need to join forces and reach a formal agreement so we can keep internet freedom and media freedom high on the global agenda. And that's one of the reasons, for instance, why we are founding members of the Freedom Online Coalition and the Media Freedom Coalition, and why we hosted the World Press Freedom Conference in December last year. There, we and almost 60 other countries endorsed the Hague Commitment, a pledge to increase the safety of journalists and to independently investigate and prosecute all forms of attacks on journalists and media workers, both online and offline. And we welcome other states to endorse the Hague Commitment and to join us in the subsequent joint statement that the Netherlands will issue during the 46th session of the Human Rights Council. Because, as Walter Cronkite, the legendary journalist and former anchorman of CBS Evening News once said, freedom of the press is not just important to democracy, it is democracy. Let's never forget that.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely true. Now, let's move to Poland. Foreign Minister Zbigniew Władimir Rau is waiting for us. Here is his speech.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear Heiko, dear Jean-Yves, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate your timely proposal to look at the matter of the human rights in the context of pandemic preparedness and response. I am very glad to address the participants of this important event. Poland has joined the Alliance for Multilateralism since we believe that the initiative will help the United Nations to respond to current global challenges more effectively. We look at the alliance with hope. Still, we know that the words need to be followed by concrete actions. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has raised the issue of health security to the level of most essential human rights. We need to make sure that the production and distribution of vaccines is rapid and that vaccination system is effective and accessible to all. We are obviously focusing on COVID-19 now. We know, however, that other problems have not disappeared miraculously. A number of them have worsened even further, including mental health issues and domestic violence. Cyberspace proved to be even more important and urgent challenge these days. Fake news and misleading data are spreading in the world with a devastating force. In order to address this problem, Poland will host a Cyber Summit, Internet Governance Forum, in December this year. Furthermore, the climate change did not pause due to the pandemic. We still have to improve public health while developing a sustainable economic future. With the United States recommitting to the Paris Agreement, we stand a better chance to make bigger steps in protecting planet's natural resources and biodiversity. Ladies and gentlemen, as long as we draw conclusions from the experience of the pandemic, as long as we stand united, we have a chance to act more vigorously than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And we are moving now to India, and I'm greeting the Vice Foreign Minister of India, His Excellency Vikas Swarup. I'm sorry, Your Excellency, we cannot hear you. Maybe you have to unmute yourself.
Excellencies, Ministers Mas and Ministers Le Drian, and distinguished participants, we meet at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic continues its unprecedented impact on global health and well-being. The pressing need of the hour is to ensure global cooperation and solidarity in ensuring equitable access to vaccines, particularly for developing countries. In this context, India has opposed vaccine nationalism and has made its vaccine manufacturing capabilities available to the entire world. From Bangladesh to Brazil, and from Morocco to Fiji, the pharmacy of the world is supplying millions of vaccine doses to more than 70 countries. It is essential to take globally coordinated action to prevent further spread of the virus and prepare for the next global pandemic through improving capacities, developing protocols, and building a global knowledge base and expertise. On climate action, India is among the top 10 countries in the Climate Change Performance Index with 2 degrees centigrade compatible nationally determined contributions, and the only country among the G20 nations on track to meet its climate change mitigation commitments. India has always articulated its belief in ethical and people-centric approach to climate change by espousing climate justice and sustainable development. Our target to reach 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by the end of this decade, our success in providing clean cooking fuel to over 80 million households, universal electrification and sanitation in all of our 600,000 plus villages, and uplifting more than 270 million people from multidimensional poverty are not only wholesome contributions towards climate adaptation efforts, but are also practical steps to ensure the right of development for all of our citizens. We also support the meaningful participation of women and marginalized groups in national level climate change policy and planning processes. through initiatives like the International Solar Alliance and Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. We are also forging international coalitions to help other countries meet their climate change obligations and create resilient infrastructure. Let me conclude by saying that India has always believed in an integrated, comprehensive, and holistic pathway through collective partnerships to fight global challenges. These challenges are also opportunities to strengthen multilateralism so as to build a greener, cleaner, and a sustainable world through equitable and inclusive solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And we are going now to Cyprus. The Permanent Secretary, Cornelius Corneliou, is joining us now online.
Thank you, Excellencies. It is with distinct pleasure that I'm participating at the ministerial meeting of the Alliance for Multilateralism. I commend France and Germany for this initiative. The pandemic is forcing us to resort to virtual events and to adapt the way we carry out our policies. And yet, we remain committed to our goals, acknowledging that challenges bring opportunities to improve, to strengthen, and to create collectively. We have all welcomed the new prospects opening before us by advances in technology, science, and connectivity. Positive as that may be, we still need to intensify our efforts and engage with more purpose if we are to successfully tackle the global challenges. The combined effects of the decade-old global economic crisis, the migration, the rise of xenophobia, and the ever-present threat of terrorism have rendered the international landscape more challenging, leading also, regrettably, to protectionism, revisionism, and selective retreat from international institutions and agreements. The pandemic has triggered a sense of urgency, forcing us to retake stock and reevaluate. It now clearly serves as a stark reminder of the need to cooperate, not only across borders, but also across gender and generations. The pandemic does not discriminate, neither should we. Our response will determine the rate of our recovery, whether we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, whether we make meaningful change towards securing the rights of women, children, and youth, whether we handle effectively the climate change crisis. International cooperation remains the only platform to address global challenges. Sticking to our multilateral system and rules and working together to improve them must be our guide, a blueprint that incorporates respect of international law and human rights. Cyprus' long-held commitment to the values showcased by multilateralism and international cooperation has led us to submit our candidature for election to the Human Rights Council for the period 2025-27 for the first time. Dear ministers, we share a common destiny. Our efforts will be our legacy. Their success will be the best guarantee for the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And we are moving now to Mexico, and I'm greeting the Vice Foreign Minister Martha Delgado Peralta.
Agradecemos la iniciativa de Alemania y Francia de convocar a esta reunión de la Alianza para el Multilateralismo, que se abocará a los temas de la preparación y respuesta ante la pandemia por el virus de COVID-19 y el Internet y el clima como nuevas fronteras para los derechos humanos. México forma parte de esta Alianza para el Multilateralismo, convencido de que un multilateralismo basado en el derecho internacional y que busque promover el respeto irrestricto de los derechos humanos a través de diversos esquemas de cooperación es la vía por excelencia para poder alcanzar la paz y la estabilidad internacionales. La pandemia ocasionada por el virus del COVID-19 es un gran desafío que enfrentamos todos los países y esto requiere de un multilateralismo eficaz para coordinar mejores respuestas, intercambiar buenas prácticas y establecer canales de cooperación que permitan a los estados cumplir con sus obligaciones en materia de derechos humanos. Esta crisis, además, ha afectado particularmente a las personas más vulnerables y con acceso limitado a las tecnologías digitales. Las desigualdades sociales se han hecho más evidentes con la crisis económica, provocando más desempleo, rezagos educativos y una limitada atención médica. Esta crisis sanitaria también brinda a los gobiernos la oportunidad de promover esquemas de salud más sólidos, más resilientes y también de acelerar los esfuerzos encaminados a lograr una cobertura sanitaria universal. El acceso a tecnologías digitales puede tener un impacto muy positivo en las personas más vulnerables y marginadas. El sector privado jugará un papel crucial en la reducción de la brecha digital y en la creación de infraestructura tecnológica. Construyendo puentes entre los estados, compartiendo nuestras mejores prácticas, podemos resolver los desafíos que enfrenta la humanidad tras esta pandemia. Nosotros estamos convencidos que el multilateralismo es la vía por excelencia que nos permite garantizar los derechos humanos de todas las personas y encaminar nuestros esfuerzos hacia un desarrollo sostenible.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Now, let's get the perspective of Korea, and I'm greeting the Vice Foreign Minister, His Excellency Choi Young-moon.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, it is a great honor for me to join today's virtual meeting. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Minister Maas of Germany and Minister Le Drian of France for their tireless endeavors in shoring up international solidarity. My special thanks also go to the participants for their united support for multilateralism, as this alliance is at the forefront in the fight against COVID-19 and building back better. Our gathering today focuses on new frontiers for human rights, which is very timely and appropriate, considering the harsh reality revealed by the pandemic. Today's issues, such as the digital revolution, climate change, and possible pandemics, call for stronger joint responses. If we do not form a united front to address these daunting challenges before they reach their tipping points, we will face irrevocable consequences. Regarding human rights online, digital technologies expose the possibility of privacy violations arising from excessive datafication and cause uneven digital empowerment, which aggravates existing inequalities, especially during these pandemic times. Misuse of digital surveillance also has been named as a new threat to a free and democratic society. However, we have clearly seen the benefit of digital technologies in relation to health, freedom of expression, and access to information. Digital technologies enable us to deliver effective and efficient public health services, provide access to a wealth of information, and boost individual communication power. Bearing this in mind, the Korean government has been seeking to bring international attention to the human rights implications of digital technologies by adopting a Human Rights Council resolution in 2019. In accordance with the resolution, various interactive dialogues and studies have proceeded on this significant critical issue. As a core group of the resolution, the Korean government emphasized that digital technologies harbor both opportunities and challenges, and we need to approach the issue in a holistic, balanced, and pragmatic manner. I believe we should aim to maximize the positives and minimize the negatives through close cooperation with multi-stakeholders, particularly the tech community, the business sector, and civil society. I am happy to see that other relevant initiatives, including the Freedom Online Coalition, Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, UNESCO, and RSF, Reporters Without Borders, have joined today's meeting. Their valuable work contributes to providing appropriate guidance for new technologies regarding human rights. The Korean government will continue to work together with such partners to promote and protect human rights online. To this end, we are going to table another Human Rights Council resolution on new and emerging technologies and human rights at the 47th session in June this year. I look forward to your continued interest and support in the second resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Korea. And now we are moving to Switzerland and looking forward to get the perspective by State Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Livia Loy is joining us now.
Merci beaucoup. Messieurs les coprésidents.
Thank you very much. Co-chairs, ladies and gentlemen, ministers and deputy ministers. I thank you for organizing this meeting of the Alliance for Multilateralism on the margin of the Human Rights Council meeting in Geneva. We are convinced that multilateralism and democratic principles, as well as human rights, must be at the very heart of any answer we bring to the present pandemic. More than ever before, we must guarantee the freedom of internet, the respect of privacy, and the right to freedom of expression, of meeting, and of peaceful association, both on and offline. Switzerland is actively promoting these principles, particularly via the Freedom Online Coalition. Guaranteeing access to factual and trustworthy information is essential. Journalists must be able to work without reprisal. We welcome the efforts made by the Forum on Information and Democracy in this regard. The multitude and diversity of actors, this initiative creates an important space for digital governance. We therefore created the Geneva Internet Platform, which brings together ideas and abilities that are concentrated in that city. Multilateralism is essential to meet present challenges, including the present pandemic. We need to guarantee a fair distribution of vaccines, diagnosis, and treatments, in particular in fragile and conflict zones. Switzerland welcomes the COVAX initiative, which we are participating in as a self-financing country and also as a donor. We are also contributing to different organizations in the context of the 3 pillars of the ACT Accelerator. Universal health coverage and the fight against the pandemic, at the same time as we protect human rights, must be our shared goal. Multilateral action saves lives. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And we are moving now to Argentina, and I'm greeting the Vice Foreign Minister, Pablo Anselmo Tetamanti. Looking forward to your speech.
Argentina has a strong commitment to multilateralism, not only from a philosophical point of view, but also because we believe that it is in our interests to build an international society on the basis of solidarity and rules of law. Therefore, we have naturally been participating in the Alliance for Multilateralism, aiming towards more equal, fair, diverse, and inclusive societies. As we have witnessed, global vulnerability to the COVID-19, over and above its specific challenges, has exposed decades of increasing inequality, both within and between countries. This comes as a result of years of underinvestment in the real economy, public health, and social protection systems, amid a languid state of the global multilateral architecture. We believe this scenario can provide a much-needed momentum for a coordinated international response to address the effects of the pandemic with human rights at its core. Indeed, the international community committed to share resources, knowledge and technology so challenges posed by the coronavirus could be better addressed. Despite those efforts, the technological advances we achieved at record pace unfortunately mirrored the asymmetric world we currently live in. Currently, only 10 high-income countries have so far administered 75% of all vaccinations, while more than 130 countries have not received a single dose. No one could be blocked from getting a life-saving vaccine because of the country they live in or the amount of money in their pocket. Vaccines should be global public goods, accessible to all countries on an equal basis. The multilateral system has a major responsibility in ensuring that no one is left behind in this endeavor, because no one will be safe until everyone is safe. The World Health Organization, along with the World Trade Organization and the COVAX facility, must come together with member states and all those with the required power, scientific expertise, and financial capacities to facilitate sufficient supply and fair distribution of vaccines and support capacity building in developing countries. The same principles of fairness and collective action I have just mentioned should be supported and mainstreamed in most of our multilateral agenda. In this 2 minutes, it is not easy to address climate change, artificial intelligence, and human rights, but the principles are the same. International challenges are interconnected and require global response. The world needs stronger multilateralism to tackle these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And we are moving on now with Lithuania. And I'm greeting now Vice Foreign Minister Mantas Adomainas.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Lithuania has always agreed that the only way to create a peaceful, stable and prosperous world is through effective rules based on multilateralism. Last year, when COVID-19 pandemic swept through every part of the world, it was an explicit evidence that no country can tackle the pandemic and overcome this unexpected global challenge alone. Our fight against the pandemic and its consequences requires enhanced international cooperation and worldwide solidarity. At the same time, it is of utmost importance to maintain principles of democracy and the rule of law. Without it, the human rights regime could always fall prey to dangerous destabilization and erosion. Therefore, the access to reliable information and to free and independent media remains crucial, as well as the need to push back disinformation and propaganda. Despite the changing landscape of today's communication, media independence and transparency are indispensable preconditions and essential safeguards of well-functioning democracy. We support the goals formulated in the Declaration for International Partnership for Information and Democracy within the framework of the Alliance for Multilateralism. In the context of Lithuania's campaign for a seat of the Human Rights Council in 2022-2024, we will also continue our ongoing activities in the promotion of freedom of expression online and offline, as well as for better protection of journalists. I use this opportunity to assure you that our common goal remains the implementation of the Agenda 2030, Paris Agreement, adherence to the principles of the rule of law and protection of human rights. We have to continue exploring the opportunities for cooperation, providing global solutions, and reinforcing multilateralism. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. And now let's get the perspective of Indonesia. I'm greeting the Foreign Minister Mahendra Siregar.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by accentuating that Indonesia is committed to support a more inclusive multilateral principles. In the time where we must collaborate to mitigate the biggest health crisis of our life, I believe there are two crucial elements on the relevance of multilateralism in the global fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. First, a global solidarity is needed to ensure that all nations have timely, equitable, and affordable access to vaccine. Second, vaccine multilateralism is crucial to ensure no nation, no individual are being left behind. In line with this context, as the co-chair of COVAX AMCEG, Indonesia is committed to ensure the timely distribution of vaccines to 20% citizens of the member states, although we know it is far short of the 70% herd immunity threshold required by all countries. This again is a reflection of our multilateral commitment. Other than health issue, we must ensure that the multilateralism mechanism also provides tangible solutions, such as supports on fiscal and monetary policies, mainly to assist the developing countries. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, finally, let me reiterate that multilateralism is key to address shared global challenges, but I believe there is still much to improve, especially at these difficult times. We can defeat COVID-19 and get our economies running again. I am convinced it is possible, and let's make it happen together. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And now we're moving from Indonesia to Albania, and I'm welcoming Vice Foreign Minister Agron Tari.
Mr. Chairman, Ministers, dear colleagues, distinguished participants. I'm honored to participate in the second Ministerial meeting of Alliance on Multilateralism, which is an important forum of multilateral cooperation to address global challenges by contributing to the rules-based international order and promoting joint action and solutions. While we notice that the multilateral international order is facing serious challenges, we agree that a rule-based international society is the best place to address challenges of our time, from fighting the coronavirus pandemic to climate change. While the pandemic is affecting everyone across the globe, global solidarity is now more needed than ever before. Combating COVID-19 pandemic situation reminded us once again about the importance of multilateralism in facing world crisis. We are witnessing by each passing day the direct consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic interacting with pre-existing humanitarian crisis, adding another layer of complexity to already fragile situation, weak governance and health system, affecting disproportionately the most vulnerable populations who experience the lack of access to basic service and health care, affecting their livelihoods and social protection. This pandemic situation demonstrated that the Internet is today an essential tool for accessing to information and communicating with others, as well as for many other daily activities. Infodemia COVID-19 has raised concerns about the growing power of digital platforms. In this context, we need to consider to make use of the opportunities to implement human rights online, with the aim to strengthen the protection of human rights, rule of law and democracy. The world needs a secure, fair and open digital future to ensure that privacy and dignity are not compromised. In this context, we need to take steps in cooperation with local, regional, national and international partners and stakeholders to develop concepts and standards that uphold human rights. Distinguished participants, the COVID-19 pandemic is not only a health crisis, but also a human rights crisis, and all responses to the crisis must focus on the respect of human rights. As UN Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres stressed during the IGLC, that vaccines must be a public good, accessible and affordable for all. Albania fully supports the UN's central coordinating roles in emergency and highly appreciates Secretary General's efforts in launching the Global Humanitarian Response Plan to ensure the most effective and efficient humanitarian response for all countries. No country, however, big or powerful, can address alone the complex challenges we are facing today. In this vein, Albania has co-sponsored 2 GAA landmark resolutions: global solidarity to fight COVID-19 and international cooperation to ensure global access to medicines, vaccines and medical equipment to face COVID-19, pledging global solidarity to fight the coronavirus and to boost international cooperation to ensure global access to medicines, vaccines and medical equipment. Our response needs and must be global by strengthening mechanisms to ensure the right to health, the right to social protection, as well as adopting a gender-responsive approach. We call for a more active and concrete participation from all actors and stakeholders, including the private sector and civil society, to be part of multilateralism as part of the solution of global challenges, like the corona pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, we're almost at the end. Now comes the last speaker for today, and we are welcoming the Vice Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom, His Excellency Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon.
Minister Mas, Minister Le Drian, colleagues, it's a real pleasure to join you on behalf of the United Kingdom at this important meeting. The need for coordinated global action against COVID-19 is stronger than ever. And let me assure you the United Kingdom will continue to use our presidency of the G7 this year to deliver concrete improvements to global health security. This must also include improving the monitoring of diseases, the pandemic potentials through a One Health approach through all the institutions, whether it's the World Health Organization, the FAO, or the UN Environmental Programme. And that's why we've committed an extra 30% to core funding to the World Health Organization. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to dominate headlines, continues to impact all of us, we know that global access to vaccines, therapeutics, and indeed diagnostics is the only way, by working together, that we can end the pandemic, enable collective recovery, and indeed control future outbreaks. We are therefore proud to support access for COVID-19 tools, accelerated partners, including by providing funding of £330 million to CEPI, FIND, and COVID-19 Therapeutics Accelerator. We are also delighted that our contribution of £548 million to the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment helped mobilise additional funding of $1 billion this year. And the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has confirmed that the majority of excess supplies from the UK will go to the COVAX facility. Together, we can win the fight against COVID. Together, we can repair the damage that COVID has wrought to our economies, social and economic development. And together, we can build that new future for the globe.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That was our last speaker for today, ladies and gentlemen. That was the ministerial meeting of the Alliance for Multilateralism. Thank you so much for your participation, for sharing your brilliant ideas and thoughts with us. So many ideas, so much inspiration, and so many issues are on the table. Once again, we learned that our global problems can only be solved in common. So let's take action now. Or, as former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill once said, never solve a problem by putting it on ice. So in this sense, I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you very much again. Have a nice day. Goodbye and stay healthy.